Hello and welcome back to this damn idealistic crusade. This video is all about the annual Barnes & Noble Criterion sale. Of course, this happens now every July, as is well known among collectors, and at other points in the year, usually around November. This is the best time of the year to stock up on Criterion titles because the entire collection that is currently available and some of the new pre-orders are all half off. That means the box sets, collections, UHD combo releases, and multi-disc releases are usually the best titles to focus on. But it's also a means to play catch up because all of us film collectors don't have the disposable income to buy all the releases that we want to. And also, as is more and more apparent, Criterion releases are not always made to the same quality standard. And in more recent years, there's been a trend of having releases with less or seemingly little to no extras, but also having frequent examples of poor disc encoding in regards to their Blu-ray releases. So on a level in terms of the amount of materials you get on a release, that can vary wildly, and the amount of effort put on a release, that can vary wildly, but also the technical standards can vary wildly. And of course, you can also go further into that and look at transfers and masters, and of course, the mastering of audio, which is always a crapshoot with any sort of label, depending on what they're given. And Criterion does have a penchant for sometimes doing audio processing of their own on top of things. So trying to figure out what the best Criterion releases are to make your dollar go as far as possible, but also get the best quality presentation of a film and one that may be better than releases from other labels in other countries of the same master, it does require a little bit of detective work. So I thought I would make a basic suggestions video for this sale for July 2024 and not focus on the great films that Criterion has released because there are so many I couldn't cram them all into one video, nor will I ever be able to afford all of them. But instead I wanted to focus on and highlight titles that I think are done as well as they can be from a technical perspective and are also great films and also have a great amount of supplements in order to really highlight titles that I think are worth your time and attention and your hard-earned money. So to start, I'm going to highlight a title where the Criterion Blu-ray release is really the best you can do because this film didn't have a whole lot of home video releases before Criterion did their DVD, and that is the absolute masterpiece Ace in the Hole, which is arguably the best film Billy Wilder ever made. This is such a staggering work that is so ahead of its time and so blistering and scathing in its intensity and criticism of American society that it was a huge box office failure on its original release. Even after it was retitled and reissued, it was still a failure. So this meant that Wilder sort of retreated and made more audience appeasing films or films where the meaning was sort of buried in, say, a hit Broadway show like The 7-Year Itch throughout the rest of the 1950s until he sort of bounced back with, of course, Some Like It Hot in 1959 and then The Apartment in 1960. So this is, I think, in ways an even stronger film than Sunset Boulevard, and it's up there with Sunset Boulevard and The Apartment and Double Indemnity as arguably the best film and the most important and most striking film that Billy Wilder ever made. And of course, again, there was not really a home video history for this film before the Criterion DVD. There were some releases on Obscure VHS and a PAL Region 2 DVD, and that was it. So really the Criterion release is your only option. This is the first pressing that's a dual format Blu-ray and DVD release of the Blu-ray version, so it has the more deluxe packaging. This has now been redone in their standard Skinovo release design if you like your releases to be uniform, and of course I think they removed the DVD from that one, but I much prefer the fancier packaging. This was a new 2K scan and restoration and has a lot of nice supplements and really striking artwork, so this is one of the titles that I think is worth its weight in gold in terms of the Blu-ray release because it's really your only option for one of the greatest American films ever made, and arguably Billy Wilder's career masterpiece. And also, I think this is probably the most scathing film noir of them all, because I do think Ace in the Hole very much qualifies as a noir title. This film is more scathing than Fritz Lang in The Big Heat, so that should tell you something. Next is one of the essential Criterion Blu-rays that is just about as perfect as it can be, and the only thing this can improve on is having a UHD upgrade, which it really does need, because as good as this this release is coming from a 4K master, this film still, I don't think has, I don't know if it'll ever be possible to get all 100% of its visual splendor on home video, because I've seen prints of it many times, and as good as this Blu-ray is, even this doesn't quite compare. But I think it is still the single best release of a Stanley Kubrick film on physical media, and that is the release of Barry Lyndon. This is from the newer Warner 4K master in the correct ratio of 1.66 to 1 with the original mono mix, and it's the best presentation of the original mono mix on physical media, because it's even better than the older releases on DVD and even the Laserdisc, which is a rarity for a Kubrick title. It has a nice amount of supplements. It has the original poster artwork. It is a 2-disc release, so the bitrate is pretty good. Again, the one thing that this could improve upon is, since this is a 4K master and it's Barry Lyndon of all films, this practically cries out for a UHD and Dolby Vision. But, outside of getting the technical upgrade, this is about as good as it can be. And as a giant lifelong Kubrick nerd who knows way too much about the audio mixes and the aspect ratios and the home video histories of all of his films, this is the one Kubrick release on a modern format that I am happy with. And again, it has the best presentation of the film's audio on any release to date in terms of the original mono mix. So this is a no-brainer. This belongs in every collection, and it is one of the best releases the Criterion Company has ever done in terms of overall presentations, supplements, and the technical standards of the transfer and the audio track. Next is another of the best Blu-rays Criterion has ever done across the board, and arguably, I think for me, it's between Barry Lyndon and this release as the best overall Criterion Blu-ray of all time, and that's High Sierra, the 1941 Warner masterpiece, which broke Humphrey Bogart into immortal stardom, written by John Huston and directed by the legendary Raoul Walsh, as really a sort of capstone to the first wave of the 1930s iconic Warner gangster films. And of course, it has a lot of themes that you would consider much closer to a Western, which is why Walsh remade the film as a Western, Colorado Territory, in 1949. And that film is included on the second disc. So you're actually getting 2 films for the price of 1. And Colorado Territory is an outstanding Western, and that transfers from a new preservation master. High Sierra was the product of a new 4K restoration, which is sublime, and it has the best presentation of the film's mono mix on physical media, far superior to the DVD and Laserdisc. This is a gigantic transfer upgrade in picture and sound. This is also loaded with supplements in addition to the truly underrated Western remake, Colorado Territory. So this is absolutely stuffed. It has a feature-length documentary on Walsh as well, and in terms of the transfer specs and overall value for money, this is literally perfect. And again, if I had to name what I felt was the best Criterion Blu-ray of all time of their releases to date in terms of the film, the presentation, the audio, the amount of supplements, the value for money, and the technical standards and the disc encoding, it would be between Barry Lyndon and High Sierra, but I think I might give the nod to High Sierra. Again, the only way this could be better is if it got a UHD, which it deserves. So I do hope at some point Criterion decides to upgrade both High Sierra and Barry Lyndon to UHD. If you're looking for a Blu-ray collection to get in the sale that gets you more value for money in terms of more films and supplements and things, I think the best overall choice is Todd Browning's Sideshow Shockers, which I have also reviewed on this channel. This brings together 3 fantastic films, the most famous being Freaks. All 3 films, Freaks, The Unknown, and The Mystic, have been newly restored, and those are contained here with a nice amount of supplements and some legacy extras in terms of Freaks. But the real standout is The Unknown, which is a silent masterpiece and arguably the best of the Todd Browning, Lon Chaney Sr. collaborations, and the new restoration here restores crucial bits of missing material. So now the film is almost complete or nearly complete in regards to restoring the original premiere version. And The Unknown is one of the silent masterpieces of the medium. It is arguably the best film that Todd Browning ever directed, and it may have Lon Chaney Sr.'s greatest performance, which is saying something. It's a staggering work, and as much of a classic and a cult film as Freaks is, the real standout is The Unknown, and getting this restoration here in a lovely package with some great extras at a nice discount, plus getting the benefit of a restored early earlier, lesser discussed and harder to see Browning film, The Mystic, with a lot of his sort of core themes, is fascinating. So it all fits within a sort of circus or magician sleight of hand outsider theme, which was Todd Browning's bread and butter, essentially, and that's what the packaging has gone for. This is a nice set and does have a nice amount of extras. The only issue here is there is a tiny bit of encoding issues on Freaks, which I highlighted in my review. It really only affects one shot, but that is unfortunate that even in a release that is otherwise exemplary, you do have Criterion's iffy encoding practices rear their ugly head up. Now for the UHD releases, and these are important to focus on because at half price you get a significant savings during the sales. Everyone needs a copy of Citizen Kane. The Criterion UHD is the best release of the film on physical media that we've ever had, and they really have eked out as much as possible in terms of the limited elements with the Warner MPI 4K scan and how that was handled, and then Criterion handling the Dolby Vision HDR, and having a new transfer of the original mono mix, which is thankfully better than past releases, which were pretty scrubbed. This is a gigantic visual improvement over the old Warner Blu-ray, which was showing its age and not that great to begin with and had a really scrubbed audio track. But of course, you do have to remember that the Blu-ray of the film did have an error, so those were corrected and newer copies are supposed to be unaffected. But if you're still watching the Blu-ray version and you don't have 4K capability, do keep in mind that you want to check the Blu-ray disc as soon as you get this to make sure that you have the updated version. The Dolby Vision is really well done, and that's the main difference in terms of the UHD on the Criterion release versus the Warner release in the UK, which is HDR10 only. However, you can compare the two, and some prefer the UK version in terms of the encoding, but also the Criterion release does have a new audio transfer, which is probably the third best overall presentation of the original mono mix on physical media and is far better than the Warner versions, but it is still not as good as the best versions, which actually the best iteration, as I've discussed in my review, is on the Turner 1991 VHS tape because that wasn't hit with any major usage of noise reduction, which unfortunately Criterion felt the need to apply some here, and that does mar the audio somewhat, but it is still far better than the Warner release, and this is loaded with new supplements, plus a bunch of legacy supplements, and a much better documentary than the old PBS one that Warner would always recycle. So this is an exceptional package and value for money, except for the fact that this has just about the worst packaging in home video history. It is atrociously bad. It has the god-awful slanted slipcover, which gets damaged, and then the stupid fold-out design with the discs and slots, and then the thick booklet in the middle, and you have the stupid fold outs that you do in 4, and as you see, I'm having to hold the booklet here with my fingers so it doesn't go flopping out. But yeah, this, as I've talked about in my reviews and many others have, this is atrocious, and just keep in mind you're going to have to deal with this horrendously bad packaging, but it is still worth it, and you do get your money's worth, and it's nearly perfect. Let's put it that way. It could have been perfect had we not had this awful packaging and had they left the audio track alone and not hit it with that noise reduction. But it is still an incredible value for money. The supplements are fantastic, and the transfer is the best we've ever gotten, and a huge improvement over the old Warner release, and likely the best we're going to see the film look given the limited elements. It's just a shame we had to deal with this craptastic packaging, which was a terrible idea, and the slightly scrubbed mono track. Similarly, we have the Blu-ray UHD combo release of the masterpiece Double Indemnity. This is, like Kane, about the best that can be done with the elements that survive, and Criterion handled the Dolby Vision HDR themselves, and I think image-wise, this is sensational and really as good as it possibly can be, I think. But again, like Kane, we have a better transfer of the original mono mix, which is basically the same source, and it doesn't have the extreme processing of the Universal versions, but it has had some noise reduction in processing, so it's not as good as the old Universal Laserdisc. So this is the second best sounding presentation of the film. It could have been as good as the Laserdisc had they left it alone, but Criterion doesn't like to leave audio alone. But then again, most people can't leave audio alone, whether it's a studio or label. So the audio being just a little bit scrubbed of detail is the major transfer issue. Otherwise, this is sensational, and the encoding is well done on the UHD, and the Blu-ray is solid as well. This does have a mixture of new and legacy features. It has most of the Universal Legacy features ported over, but unfortunately drops the second commentary from the 2006 DVD, which is unfortunate. There is no new commentary, and while the new Criterion extras are solid, I wish there had been more, because it feels like it's only kind of scratching the surface of Double Indemnity. But the major draw is getting the complete full-length Billy How Did You Do It documentary, which is basically a long-form multi-hour interview with Wilder himself that we've only gotten excerpts before on US releases, and there was a Eureka release of The Lost Weekend that had the whole thing, but now we have it here in the US on the Criterion release, which makes this extra important. But still, I wish it had had some more extras and had the second commentary and not felt the need to scrub the audio track. Next would be the UHD Blu-ray combo release of the classic Shaft, which was given a new 4K restoration with Dolby Vision HDR and both the original mono mix and an alternative stereo remix, and a nice selection of extras, both new and old, which are really well done. Plus, it also gives you a 1080p copy on the second Blu-ray of the first sequel, also directed by Gordon Parks, Shaft's Big Score, which was already released by Warner Archive. And while it was nice that Criterion included the film here, it is not as well encoded as the Warner Archive Blu-ray. Plus, this doesn't include the third film, Shaft in Africa, which is like the first sequel, Shaft's Big Score. Both sequels are very underrated. So I would recommend picking up the Warner Archive multi-pack release with the two sequels, which also comes with the old Warner BD of the first film, and it's very cheap. But at least you do get a version of the first sequel to try out one of the sequels if you haven't seen them. The new artwork is really well done. The disc encoding is well done. The HDR is well done. The mono mix is well handled. And I think, again, this is one of the essential Criterion UHDs that is really well done, except for the fact that I would have liked, if they were going to include the first sequel, that it was at least as well encoded as the archive release, and that they had included the third film, so we would have a complete trilogy set all in one. But at least the first film has been well done, and it is a gigantic improvement over the old Warner Masters, to say the least. And then lastly, for a box set suggestion, and let alone a UHD box set suggestion, if you were to pick up any title in the sale, I think the absolute top recommendation in terms of overall quality and getting an absolutely astounding technical presentation in the home of truly landmark masterworks of art, and films that still are not as revered as they should be, and the product of restorations that are absolutely staggering, in addition to having some nice supplements and getting an incredible value for money. It is the Renowned Westerns set, which is a 4K UHD and Blu-ray combo set release of the major westerns known as the Renowned Cycle, directed by Bud Boetticher, mostly written by Burt Kennedy, and of course starring the iconic Randolph Scott. This has most of the westerns that Scott and Boetticher made together that were done for Columbia, so these are Sony 4K restorations. There are two more outlier films, the big one being Seven Men from Now, which is under Paramount because that was made by John Wayne's Bad Jack Company. But the Sony restorations are, to say they are jaw-dropping does not even begin to explain how astonishing these are, because all of these were shot on location, mostly in Lone Pine, California, and they are visually staggering. They are perfect distillations of the entire Western genre. They are the Western as distilled and perfected as they possibly can be, as these were all B films, usually under 80 minutes long. And the last two films, Ride Lonesome and Comanche Station, were actually done in scope. And the way Bedecker utilizes scope imagery is absolutely astonishing. But Sony has returned to the well with these films time and time again. They did a decent DVD release. They did HD upgrades, which Indicator released an amazing Blu-ray set of, which has a lot of exclusive extras that don't port over to the Criterion release. So that is still an important set. But now in the 4K realm, they've gone back again, and they have just done another of their pulling rabbits out of the hat in terms of achieving magical results with iconic works of art in the 4K realm. And additionally, you have Dolby Vision HDR on this release. And these are some of the finest looking home video presentations of any film that has ever existed. These are absolutely staggering. Sony did an absolutely beyond incredible job with these. They look immaculate. Everything has been left alone. These are archival transfers. They even worked really hard on getting the day for night shots right. And even the transitions are not messed with in terms of the grain field. These are archival preservations of some of the greatest Westerns ever made, and some of the great American works of art, really. They are that astounding, and everyone needs to see these, and this is the perfect way to do it if you haven't for the first time. And you get a nice amount of extras, but again, I would recommend people pair this with the previous Indicator Blu-ray release, which has far more supplements and care put into the overall box set booklet and things, but that set is out of print, so you just have to pick up the standard Indicator disc with all their great extras. This does also have the films on Blu-ray, and it's the same amazing Sony 4K masters, but you again run into Criterion's not so good disc encoding on the Blu-rays. So that is a concern. It's not as bad as some, and it's not as noticeable, but you're really buying this set for the stellar UHD releases with Dolby Vision from the amazing Sony 4K restorations, plus the exclusive extras. And most of those are on the Blu-ray disc, so you're just going to be looking at the supplemental Blu-ray disc. But essentially what they did on the Blu-rays is they crammed too many films onto too few discs, and the encoding isn't the greatest in the world, so the Blu-rays are a definite downgrade from the UHDs in terms of the disc encoding. But still, if you're Blu-ray only, this is still an important set because you're able to get the better brand new Sony 4K restorations in SDR, plus some new and exclusive supplements that aren't on the previous Indicator releases. But again, this is a set containing breathtaking new Sony restorations of some of the greatest Westerns ever made. Lastly, I'd like to mention some of the newer releases and brand new releases that I'm going to be picking up in the sale that I think are very important. Earlier this year, we had a dual format UHD and Blu-ray release of the classic gangster epic, The Roaring Twenties, which again was at the tail end of the 1930s Warner gangster cycle, again directed by the legendary Raoul Walsh with James Cagney and Humphrey Bogart, among many others. And that is a title I am just beyond excited to be able to look at. Then, of course, there is the recent release of a new restoration of The Devil and Daniel Webster, also known as All That Money Can Buy. This is a classic of its genre that has had a very troubled preservation history, and the elements are in very poor shape. So the past restorations, really the first release was the Criterion Laserdisc of the first attempt at a restoration, and then they upgraded that to DVD. And as good as those were, the elements were still really rough, and we're lucky we even have the film as it survived and it's been able to be restored to. So now getting a modern digital restoration with new supplements able to go much further in terms of preservation than we were in the photochemical realm in terms of what we were able to do is really something. So that is a new Blu-ray release. It's unfortunately Blu-ray only, but I think that's also because of the limited nature of the elements. But that is a major release that is doubly important for being a film that has been pieced back together painstakingly over multiple restorations over many decades, and of course it's a classic Criterion Laserdisc title coming back to the fold. But if there was a standout in the new releases, that of course is what I think is without question Criterion's most important release of the year, which is the new UHD and Blu-ray combo set release of Sam Peckinpah's butchered masterpiece Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid. This not only includes a new version of the film, which is basically a new recut of the film, but also the so-called preview version, which is essentially the assembly version that Peckinpah was able to make before the film was taken out of his hands by a vengeful studio and hacked down into the butchered theatrical cut, which is also presented here. And that's a major victory because the theatrical cut has been unavailable since the earliest home video releases and television broadcasts. And the theatrical cut has some unique materials that were not in the preview version, which was first released on Laserdisc. And then the DVD came out in 2005, and it had the Laserdisc master of the preview version and then a new 2005 cut that was trying to combine elements of the two. So this release has new supplements, a new 4K scan, and UHDs for the new version of the film, which was overseen by the original editor, Roger Spottiswoode, and is essentially a sort of version 2 of that 2005 version. So this is a long-awaited release for all of us Peckinpah and Western fans. The film was never really finished in the proper sense due to the power struggles going on in MGM and how James Aubrey and others really took out as much venom as they could on Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid, and Peckinpah really was not in the best state at the time, so it does have a little bit of the same situation as Major Dundee in that it's impossible to know exactly what Peckinpah would have done had he been left alone and been able to finish the film entirely. But I do think the preview version is the way to go, and it's how I always rewatch the film. But Criterion was rumored to have picked up the rights years and years ago, and it seems like they've done their usual thing of sitting on a film for ages until they feel like doing a release. But I'm at least glad the wait was worth it because we've now gotten a new 4K restoration, a new version of the film, all kinds of new effort put in, and new supplements, and a big deluxe UHD and Blu-ray release. My only qualm is that the preview version is only a 2K master, and it's going to be on the Blu-ray, which probably won't have the best encoding in the world, and it really needed to be a UHD and a 4K master because that preview version is the only version that Peckinpah himself signed off on and had anything to do with. And if you believe the story, is the version that they snuck print cans out and hid it in his garage so that MGM wouldn't get their hands on it and destroy it. So the history of the film is long and tumultuous, but it is a staggeringly powerful work. It is essentially a drug and alcohol fueled tone poem about death and not only the misery of human existence, but the futility of human existence. And for my money, it is one of the most profound films and easily the saddest film ever released by an American studio, even in the butchered theatrical cut. It is one of the great Westerns. It is one of Peckinpah's masterpieces, even though it was never quite 100% finished and it was butchered in the theatrical version. But it is a film that you study and you never forget and you immerse yourself in. And so that's why it's Criterion's most important release of the year, and why getting the new UHD Blu-ray combo set is really important to get during the sale because it is half price. So those are my overall suggestions for important titles to maybe consider during the Criterion sale. All of these are, of course, half off with all the other Criterion titles, but as I said at the start, I try to focus on titles that are getting you more value for your money in terms of the films, the supplements, maybe even supplemental films or multi-film packages or box sets, but also looking at the overall transfer quality, the disc encoding, the audio, and even the printed materials, because all of this stuff is important. And I do think it is important to focus on not just the titles that you want to get, but the titles that are more worth your hard-earned money. And, it bothers me that certain Criterion titles aren't to the same technical standards, particularly in audio and disc encoding. And then there are releases that don't have a lot of extras or need to see an update and never do. So, there are various concerns that I do think mean that you need to do some detective work. And there are a lot of Criterion releases that are not as good as others. For example, some of the newer UHDs even that I really am wanting to pick up, I have to wait because they do have better releases in Europe that are sometimes even a little bit cheaper. For example, The Long Good Friday is a new Criterion UHD release, the 1980 masterpiece, but Arrow Video in the UK have put out their own UHD, which is actually better and has more extras, and of course has better disc encoding, so I think that's a no-brainer. But also the new release of the Michael Powell 1960 masterpiece Peeping Tom, has a new Criterion UHD with pretty good art, and Studio Canal has done a UHD in Europe of the same 4K restoration and master with pretty much most of the same supplements, and it is far better encoded. So that is another title that you do need to get the import version instead, because it is a much better release, even though it's the same master. So even some of the newer releases, it's not a slam dunk or a sure bet that the Criterion version will actually be the best edition on in both technical standards and having all or the best supplements. So it does pay to do a little bit of digging around and research, but those are just two modern examples where the new Criterion UHD is actually not as good as the European option, which is roughly about the same price and sometimes can even be a little bit cheaper. So in those two instances, for example, I would advise people to do what I'm going to do and actually get the UK versions and import them. So I just decided to throw this video together just to give people a few recommendations and try to encourage people to maybe look a little bit at the technical side of things and the overall value for money in terms of the presentation quality and the amount of supplements and how much you're actually getting for the money you're spending on each release. Because again, no two Criterion releases are the same in terms of the amount of supplements and the amount of quality control and care put into the release. Because again, your mileage will vary wildly, especially in terms of audio and disc encoding. So as always, I hope my babblings about films and physical media has been at least somewhat fun and informative. If you are going to pick up anything in the Criterion sale, I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below and maybe what you did pick up. As always, we're chipping away at our never-ending wish list in these sales, but I go in with my never-ending notebook of transfer notes in my head looking at what's still in stock, which is always the not fun game we play during the Barnes & Noble sales of even trying to get what you want and making trips to stores and not being successful and dealing with the increasingly janky website and such. But still, this is the time to pick up Criterion releases, and most of us, I think, nowadays kind of wait for the sales to pick up the newer releases because we know in a month or two they're going to be half price. So it is very beneficial for the wallet, and this stuff does add up, so the savings are extraordinarily helpful. So as always, please do keep supporting both studios and boutique labels by buying films on disc in order to help keep both physical media and film culture alive. And as always, thank you ever so much for watching.